Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Daniel Millar. I'm an actor and a writer, primarily an actor, but the vast majority of writing that I do is theatre in translation. I did a languages degree before I went to drama school. So I started my sort of writing career as a translator, doing the literal translation of certain texts, specifically from German and French. And I'll tell you what a literal translation is as we go on, if you don't know. What I would like to do is I am a cameras on kind of guy. If you're comfortable with that, I'd like to put faces to names. But if you're not, don't worry about it. But what I would like to do is just go round, unmute yourselves, and tell me your name. Tell me what your favourite foreign play is, your favourite foreign playwright. If you don't have a favourite foreign player, a favourite foreign playwright, tell me your favourite foreign cheese, and we'll go on from there. But why don't we start with you, Naomi, because you were first here, and I can see you, and you look all jolly.
Hello.
Hiya.
I'm Naomi. I am a playwright and dramaturg. I don't speak any other languages, so thanks for letting me come along to this anyway. Favorite foreign writers? I'm not really sure. Other than I liked Sao Yu, Chinese writer's Thunderstorm.
Nice.
It's a bit like Ibsen's Ghosts, but Chinese, I guess. And I'm currently just started this Goats by, forgive my pronunciation, Liwa Yazji.
Nice.
That was on the Royal Court a few years ago.
Yeah.
I know that it's a translated work. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Naomi. Just a bit before we go on, no, it is not a prerequisite to know any foreign languages in this. That it would be a huge twist of fortune if everybody here could speak the same foreign language. So don't worry about that at all. Let's move on. Charlie, let's hear from you.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie Gobbett. I'm a commercial translator. So I have sort of the same background as you, Danny. Originally, I did a languages degree, French and German, probably considerably before you did it. I am an emerging theatre translator. I've been interested in getting into theatre translation. I've been sort of pursuing that in the last 4 or 5 years. And so I'm interested to hear, particularly, Danny, what you say about working with literals, because I come at it from a slightly different angle, from more actual crafting the translation from the original text and making it work on stage. I haven't had anything published in the theatre world. I've had some non-fiction published, and I'm working currently with amateur groups to get some of my translated plays on stage. I'm directing later this year and again next year with local groups in Cheshire, where there's a thriving amateur scene. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, but obviously interested in anything that any possibilities in professional theatre as well.
That's incredible. You definitely get the Proactivity Award for this session. Thank you. I'm really interested in what you said about the difference between a literal translation and actually adapting a play from the source text, which is something I will touch on. That's great. Thanks so much, Charlie, and best of luck with everything. Rachel, let's hear from you. Hi.
Hi. I'm currently studying for a master's degree in playwriting in London. And I speak French, and I would like to get into translating. I've been a drama teacher for 10 years, and I've written bilingual plays with my students. I taught French students for 6 years. So yeah, I'm just really interested in how it works, and again, like the difference between literal translation and actually producing something that's like ready to go, how that works. And yeah, just like the whole process. I'm very new to it all, so I'm really excited to just learn.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. Ginny, have I said that right? Ginny?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, it's short for Virginia, but I don't ever use that. Hello, everyone. Hi, Naomi. Yeah, hello. I'm a playwright based here in Liverpool. I'm interested in this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I wrote a play with Lalu Mokoko in South Africa, and language was an important part of it, so we wrote it in Sesotho and English. and it was really interesting because Sesotho is a very visual, image-based language, and so talking about how we were trying to get the correct meaning for me as a British English speaker, and Lalu speaking Sesotho, I mean, she obviously spoke English as well, meant that it made me really think about language and all the different things we miss out on just from writing in our language.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it had to stop because of COVID in the end, but I ran a play reading group called Read More Women, which was focusing on the plays and the scripts that we don't get to hear or read or see. And there's so many, it was for female identifying playwrights, and there's just so many beautiful plays out there that we don't see here. That's
so true. Yeah, it's so true, especially in the last few years. There's a lot of sort of immigrant theatre and theatre from refugee theatre companies and things like that. And interesting what you said about female playwrights is that, as I'm sure you're probably aware, the vast majority of famous translators or famous in a version by are men, white men.
Yeah, there's the guy who I can't remember his name now, begins with his surname, as you said, but he keeps getting incredible plays put on. The Father and what's his name? They did a film version recently.
Florian. Oh, Florian, yeah.
Yeah, him. Yeah.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yeah. You know, and his work, I think his work's translated from French, I think.
French, yeah.
But, you know, what we're missing out on. And the final thing is I'm a member of Write Local Play Global, which is an international playwriting association for playwrights who write for theatre for young audiences. And again, there's such a reach out across the world to swap information, to swap play scripts. Yeah, sorry, I've just seen Al's note there.
Oh, lovely, yeah. There you go, Christopher Hampton, yeah.
Yeah, so yes, so I'm interested because I come across a lot of plays that aren't written originally in English.
Fantastic, thanks, Ginny. Lovely. I'm going to butcher your name. I know I am. Adiam.
No, you got it right, Danny. Thank you. It is Adiam. Thank you. So yeah, my name is Adiam. I am a multidisciplinary writer, performer, and producer. I'm based in Liverpool, but I'm originally from Eritrea. So I've been bilingual most of my life, and I'm also know a couple of other languages. I come from a family of interpreters, so I really am aware of the difference between translation and interpreting, in the literal sense, in the practical sense. But I also did a project where it was kind of like a docu-drama, where there was I went to Eritrea because I've lived in the UK for a long time. I went to Eritrea in the early 2000s, and late 2000s, and I recorded live performances of traditional customs and traditional performances, which are hard to describe. And so I recorded it with permission, and I got all kinds of consent from people, and then I translated from one of the Eritrean languages, which is Tigrinya, into English. That was so hard to do. Wow. I had no training in it whatsoever. It took much longer than the actual planning, the travels and planning the permissions to record and all of that. And after that, I just knew that if I ever I want to do something like that, I had to very consciously plan it out ahead of time before I did anything like that. When it comes to writing for the stage, I've written before where I've combined a bit of Spanish, a bit of Arabic, a bit of the languages I do know, as part of the natural dialogue of people who are from different countries. What I find difficult to do is to stay creative, not be so literal, try to explain everything and try to translate everything really word for word. I want to be able to be lyrical. I want to have that kind of the same creativity that I have in English, in other languages as well. And I don't want to be bogged down by, being scientific about it, because one of my favorite writers is from a very long time ago, Zora Neale Hurston. She's an ethnographer, so she went around recording people, and then she wrote many plays. She's not known for being a playwright, but more as an author, but she recorded people's speech so well that she's one of the best examples of African American vernacular. So some people might call it Ebonics, but of that time, that was a very specific kind of speech patterns of sharecroppers in South America, in southern states of America, North America. Sorry,
can you tell me her name again, Nadia? What was her name again?
Her name is Zora Neale Hurston. So she's well known as one of the writers of the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah. So
she was a contemporary of Langston Hughes. And he was very well known. But she was more well known for her film and other endeavors. But she's run more than 50 pieces of works, including a play that I found very obscure, and it inspired one of my works. So yeah, a convoluted way of saying I have a global perspective really that affects a lot of my writing, and also I'm multilingual. Yeah. This
is absolutely incredible. Thanks so much, Nadia. And Courtney, last but not least, let's hear from you. If you're there. If you're not, don't worry. Oh, you'd hear me saying, don't worry. Okay, I'll come back to Courtney.
Sorry, I've got my internet's been cutting out, so I missed the beginning of the introductions. So my name's Courtney. I'm based in Manchester, and I'm actually an audiovisual translator. And I've come, I'm here tonight just to kind of learn something new. Really, I attended a creative writing workshop with the Northwest Translators Network, which I believe your wife is also attended, Al, maybe, or some. There was a connection there. And they mentioned the workshop that you were running tonight at the end of that workshop, and I was just interested in joining. So I don't have a direct link really as such to the theatre and the translation in theatre world, but it's something I'm quite interested in. So I thought I'd join and hear from the experts.
That's incredible. And Al has just said, yeah, his wife Becca is indeed a translator. This is fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. And actually, it seems like there's quite a lot of experience amongst us, which means I'm probably going to teach you a lot of you to suck eggs. And I apologise in advance for that. But what I will say is that there's a couple of exercises along the way. So if you can have a pen and paper in front of you, or something to type on while we're chatting away, that'd be great. We've just seen Rosie. Hi, Rosie. Welcome. Get yourself settled down, and then if you turn your camera on, you can give us a wave. But yeah, it's also very important to point out here before we start is that anything I say about to do with the process of translation, to do with anything to do with getting from page to the finished product, is entirely my own thoughts, entirely my own opinion. There are so many different schools of thought when it comes to translation. Translation studies is indeed itself a thing. It sort of came into prominence in the late 1970s, and it's really hammered home now. So when I did my degree, I don't know about you, Charlie, they really hammered home translation. It was quite a they sort of really, it was a major part of our degree. So I had to do quite a lot of translation as a part of my degree, and it's carried on into my professional life. And the vast majority of the stuff I do with my friend and colleague, Mark Leipacher of the Faction Theatre Company. Sorry, I'm going to just have a look. Let's see if I can share the screen. Here we go. Let's start this slide. Can you all see that? Theatre in translation.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so very brief overview of what we're going to do. It's a very wide view of the whole area of translation. So what is the role of a translator? The history of translation, which sounds superfluous but actually isn't. Then we're going to look at the literal. We're going to look at titles and characters, so names of things, places, people, idioms, adapting and managing tone. And then if we've got time at the end, I will touch on a thing called foreignization, which, if you haven't heard of it, is being talked about much more in the last few years. All right, so very simply, what is a translator? Someone tell me. There is no answer too short, no answer too stupid, no answer too simple. What is the role of a translator?
To assist in the communication between different languages.
Lovely, to assist in the communication between different languages. That's fantastic. Anything else?
To transfer meaning from one language to another.
Lovely, to transfer meaning as opposed to sounds and spelling. We're going to look at transliteration versus translation afterwards. That's great, thank you. Also, interpretation is very different. So being an interpreter is different to being a translator. There are, in general, 4 different types of translation. There are subsections of that. But the four most common types of translatings are professional, so medical or legal documents. This is something I've done. It's also things like instruction manuals for the new vacuum cleaner you get. So that's the kind of professional translation. I beg your pardon. Technical is the instruction manuals, user guides, things like that. Then you've got administrative, which generally tends to be sort of business jargon. You know, if you've got a multinational company, they all need to be on the same level language-wise. So it's the uniformization of business talk. But the one we're going to look at, where all the good stuff is literary translation: plays, films, books, lyrics, poetry, all that kind of stuff. So, very, very briefly, I suppose I'm just going to turn this off for a sec. So very briefly, I suppose at its core, the job is to present a piece of art to an audience that is in that audience's native language. It's the sort of most fundamental level to it, which I know sounds pretty obvious, but there is much more to it. So firstly, a direct literal translation of a text from one language into another, like you say, like we touched on a moment ago, is unlikely to have much meaning at all to the receiving audience, because linguistic nuances, linguistic tone of the original text will have been lost in translation, quite literally. So a major job for a translator is to show understanding of the linguistic tendencies of the source language, as well as the cultural distinctions within that language, and to find the appropriate way of expressing that in the second language. So as we've already touched on, in the case of theatre, film, books, a translator can't just transpose a block of text. There has to be some linguistic, some artistic leeway on the translator's part to make the language flow. Does that make sense? You know, a finished piece should sound like it was written in the language you're hearing, which means that there's quite a lot of freedom involved as a theatre translator. And as you were saying a moment ago, I think it was Charlie who was saying it, forgive me, I think it might be Ginny actually, about how far you can go with the freedom of the piece that you are translating. I'm personally of the school that you can take quite a lot of freedom, but there will be several thousand translators who completely disagree with that. As a quick side note, that freedom can't be enjoyed by, say, someone who is a music lyric translator. They're very different disciplines. You have to make sure the rhythm of the lyrics are in time to the music. So if you're a Beatles aficionado like I am, you might be aware that they had a whole few songs translated into German back in the day, and they had they recorded famously a version of "She Loves You." It was just literally translated to "Sie liebt dich, ja ja ja." Whereas, for instance, Johnny Cash translated his song "I Walk the Line," because you're mine, I walk the line. He translated that into German, but with completely different lyrics, and it completely changed the meaning of the song. It's called "Wer kennt den Weg," which means "who knows the way," and it's completely different. So there is a certain freedom that music lyric translators can enjoy, but not quite as much as a theatre or a film translator can. Also, I recommend listening to the Japanese version of Wings by Little Mix, recorded by the ladies themselves. So in the performing of plays, films and such, the translator does become responsible for the theatricality of the piece. It can't simply make sense. It has to engage the audience in the language it's being performed in, as well as maintaining the specific nuances of character, plot, idiom, tone, everything of the source text. In short, it's not very easy. But to get a foothold into how translation works, we do need to have a look sort of at how it all began. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a screen share again. Here we go. The history of translation. Very brief, obviously. It's not the literal past, the facts of history that shape us, but the images of the past embodied in language. That's a quote from what? Anyone know what that's from? I'll tell you, it's from Translations by Brian Friel. There you go. All right. So the epic poem Gilgamesh is thought to be the earliest documentary dramatic translation. Buddhist text and some diplomatic treaties were also produced in South and East Asia. It was translated from Sumerian to several Indian languages around 2000 BC. And there also exists a number of, like I say, diplomatic treaties that have been adapted from ancient Egyptian to Hittite that date around 1200 BC. The most notable Western translations would have most certainly begun with the translations of the Old Testament, and that was in about 300 BC. The Jews had dispersed across the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and so many had lost their mother tongue. So the old Jewish scriptures were translated from Old Hebrew into Greek, which was a language that most educated people living in those areas would have understood. The translation of those scriptures provided the basis for the translation of the Christian Bible. Now, the history of translation really does revolve around religion. And it was translated into Latin, into a very standardized version it was quite recent, it was in 300 AD. The Latinized version of the Bible was produced by this fella with the halo. Anyone know who that is? He's the patron saint of translators.
Saint Jerome.
Go on, Charlie. 10 points for Charlie. It's Saint Jerome.
It's like the university challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So he was, so this Latinized version of the Bible is called the Vulgate, and it's still sometimes used by the Catholic Church today. We are going to look back at that. There is a point to this, I promise. Translations of religious texts provided the basis for all dramatic translations, such as Ovid, Homer, Plato, Virgil, the Norse sagas, anything really that is a foreign text or like an old English text. These religious texts are the ones that really provided the basis for it, including actually things like Shakespeare and Chaucer, which get a lot more translations into modern English than you'd expect. All right, so let's have a look at this. Does anyone know who this guy is? That's a sculpture by Michelangelo of a famous historical figure. Anyone know who it is? That, my friends, is Moses. But why is Moses horny? Why has he got horns? Well, it's because of this. St. Jerome had two versions of the Old Testament available to him when he was translating it into Latin. He had the original Hebrew, and he had the Greek into which it had been translated 600 or 700 years earlier. He did a literal word-for-word rendering of the scriptures in order to keep the text as faithful to the original as possible. But here, in doing so, in being so literal, certain passages lose their meaning. So a classic example here is from the Vulgate, from the Latin version that St. Jerome did, Exodus 34:29. I won't read the Latin because it'll sound ridiculous, but it translates as, "And as Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he was holding the two tablets of the testimony, and he did not know that his face was horned by reason of the word of God." So translated literally from the Hebrew, karan, based on the root keren, which means horn or to have horns, Moses went up the mountain, got the 10 Commandments, and when he came down, he had horns. So that is what St. Jerome took literally. What actually happened here is that it was a sort of lost in translation. There's debate as to whether St. Jerome meant it or not, because he was a bit of a funny fella. The King James Version says this: "And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the two tablets of testimony in hand, Moses knew not that the skin on his face shone from speaking with the Lord." So karan, the root meaning to have horns, actually what was being said was that the way the sun shone down like that from the mount made it look like his face was horny, like that. So he didn't really have horns, and it was actually the sun making it look like he had horns with the shadow. But that means that like 1,500 years worth of art, of sculpture, of paintings of Moses, he's got horns because of this lost in translation. Which brings us on to the problems thrown up by the literal. We're going to look at the literal translation. The old language is a barrier to modern progress. Anyone know what that's from? It's from Translations by Brian Friel. There's a theme here. All right. So, most adaptations of foreign plays for a modern... I'm going to turn this off so I can have a look at you just for a second. I'm a bit of a Luddite. You'll have to bear with me with the old technology. Am I back? Yeah, I'm back. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So, most adaptations of foreign plays for British theatre, they tend to be, as we've already said, they tend to be presented like in a new version by or adapted by some famous playwright, like Christopher Hampton, like Martin Crimp, like, Patrick Marber, David Eldridge. But they don't advertise in the big sparkling lights on the front of the theatre as the name of the person who did the literal translation. So this is the Saint Jerome. It's the person, to all intents and purposes, is the actual translator of the play you're watching. The word translator is very malleable and can actually mean several different people along the process. But I'm using it here in the context of the person who sits down with one language and makes it into another language. That is the person who does the literal translation, the one who carried the words from the source and put them into plain English, ready for the usually monolingual adapter to make into a script that reflects the vision of a director and the requirements of a paying audience, I suppose. So when Mark Leipacher and I first began adapting Schiller for a British audience, what would happen was I would do the literal, and I did it the old-fashioned way, with the text this way, with a pencil, hard copy of the text, a German-English dictionary, and a vast amount of coffee. I would then send a word-for-word, very basic translation to Mark for him to adapt into a workable first draft, and then we bounce it back and forth between ourselves till we arrived at something we're happy with. So in that partnership, I would suppose you say I was the translator and Mark was the adapter, even though we would both generally be credited as being translators. Does that make sense? So just to say, that's not necessarily the way it's always done. Like we touched on a moment ago, if you have a playwright who is bilingual, they can skip the literal and move on straight to producing a first draft of a workable adaptation. But mostly, when a recognised playwright has been commissioned to do their version of the piece, they will pay someone to provide a literal translation that becomes the basis for the play that you're watching. Yeah? Justice for literal translators. I think we should have their name in lights at the front. What do you think? Yeah, the revolution starts here, translation fans. Okay, right, we are going to have a look at a little bit of, I'm not sure whether this will work, but I'm going to give it a go. I want you to do a literal. Now, obviously, we don't all speak the same foreign languages, if at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a literal transcription, not a literal translation, a literal transcription. I'm going to show you a very short bit of a silent film, like 40 seconds long, I think. And I want you to write down, I'll play it through twice. All I want you to do is write down everything you see. Watch the video and write down every movement, and then this happens. Nothing's too simple. The man comes down the stairs. This happens, that happens. Do that twice, and then we're going to do something with that. Okay, so I'll play it through once, and then I'll check in with you. Here it is. Okay, here we go. All right. So I'm going to play that through one more time. Write everything you see down. 10 points if you can tell me the name of the film, by the way. It is Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps. Okay, I'm going to play it through once more. Here we go. Bingo. All right. I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Who would like to read their literal transcription of what we've just seen? Nothing is too simple. Just to read out a couple of sentences that you've got there. Who'd like to give it a go? Oh, two hands up at the same time. Go on, Naomi. I think yours was just first.
This will now prove that I'm blind as a bat. But here we go. A white woman is lying in a hammock sleeping. She's woken up by two men coming down the stairs. One in a black jacket is smoking. The man in the black jacket shouts at her. Then the white-shirted man drugs her or makes her drink something. Then she tries to go up, but she can't.
Thanks, Naomi. Ginny, can you give us your version as well?
Yeah. Is it Nosferatu, Danny?
It is Nosferatu. Well done, yeah.
I only guessed because of the fella at the end. Well,
yeah.
Okay. So I had a white woman rocks in a hammock. Two men enter. Oh, she's startled by two men entering via the stairs. One is smoking. The two men discuss her. The smoking man leaves via the stairs. One man gives her a drink, takes her pulse and wraps her up. The ghost of a man appears on a bed. She tries to leave. The ghost of a man appears on a bed, but now I think it wasn't a ghost. I think it was a vampire.
Lovely, because you guessed it was Nosferatu. That's great. So you both described pretty much in the same way. It was very sober. It was very serious. It was very realistic, and you got every beat of what happened. This happened, and then that happened. Do you think, like, I would love to expand on this a bit more, but we don't have the time, sadly. But do you think, very briefly, you would be able to make a short story out of that little scene, out of what you just saw? You'd be able to hang a bit more on it, adapt it, put a bit more description in it, expand the characters, expand the scene. Would you be able to do that? So that is essentially what you do once you've got your literal. You've got your literal there, and that is basically the pegs for you to hang your story on. When you're translating, when you're adapting, it is essentially storytelling. So you get the points, the little pegs. Every sentence you translate are your pegs, and then you hang your story on that. So that's what we did there with your literal. Now, before we move on, I know we're moving at a lightning pace here, and I'm aware we need to move on just for time because my kids want their tea, and I'm sure yours do as well. Does anyone want to ask any questions about a literal translation and about the process of the literal before we move on to anything else?
Can I just ask what you do if there are not words in your language for what you see in front of you?
It's a great question. So you have to find the requisite words for it. You have to make something. Not make something up, that's wrong. What you have to do is find the corresponding words, or the words that correspond closest to the words you can't find. It's right. Having in European languages, it's actually it's very rare you come across a word that doesn't exist in any other language, because we share so much. If you're looking at an Asian language or an African language, the language that Adiam was talking about earlier, for instance, I'm sure there's lots of turns of phrase and words and things like that you wouldn't find in English. So you'd have to just find a way of saying it. Basically, be a walking thesaurus in that respect. There are certain idioms which I'll touch on later. So, for instance, Schadenfreude, which exists in English and in German, that doesn't have a direct translation in any way. It literally means shame joy, Schadenfreude. So there is no word for that, but we know what it means. Do you see what I mean there? So we're going to look.
I have a question, if you don't mind, about literal translation. So for things that are not, it's kind of similar to what Ginny said, but it's like, there's exclamations, whether it's pain or happiness. It's not a literal word. So how are the choices made of how to translate that? So how to interpret that?
How to interpret what a character's feeling as opposed to what they're saying?
If they're actually they're vocalizing whether it's their surprise or their pain, or, the only word that came to my mind is like, I I in Tigrinya and in Spanish and other things could have different meanings. So in English, it's not necessarily O. So that's what I mean. It's that kind of.
Yeah, that's a great question. It would be the equivalent utterance, the equivalent sound in that language. So my wife is Italian, and they would literally say Madonna, Mamma Mia, things like that, which literally mean the Virgin Mary and my mother. You wouldn't translate them literally into English. What you would say is like, oh, for God's sake, or oh, Jesus, something like that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's exactly what I mean. It's that kind of, if you did it literally, it wouldn't make sense. But
Exactly.
It's the equivalent maxim or idiom or whatever the utterance is you said.
That's right. So this is a problem you'd run into with the literal. If you are, so let's take that for instance, Mamma Mia. If you are translating an Italian block of text, Mamma Mia literally means my mother. So if you as the adapter have been given this literal translation and one character says my mother, you're not going to literally translate that. So what you need is a translator who is confident enough with the source language to understand that Mamma Mia doesn't mean my mother. It's an utterance of surprise or disgust or whatever it can be in that particular moment.
Great, thank you.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So we can use the tone, the context of the.
It's the tone that's important there, yeah. Which is something when you're doing a literal, you need to be aware of, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right, we're going to look very quickly at titles and characters. Okay, so oh no, I didn't want to do that. Sorry, bear with me again, being a Luddite. Okay, let's have a look at some characters. So, can anyone tell me the name of this character?
It's from Commedia dell'arte, but I can't remember.
Is it Harlequin?
It's a Harlequin, yeah.
It is, yeah. Well, I got the English name and the Italian name there. Yeah, it's Harlequin. So Harlequin is the anglicized, the English version of Arlecchino, which is the Italian stock character from the Commedia dell'arte from the 1500s. He's generally portrayed as a sort of nimble, quick-witted, very astute comic foil to the more serious or more melancholic characters. A likable figure generally, but the history of the character is steep in a bit more evil. So in Dante's Inferno, for instance, there's a character, a devil called Alicino, which is thought to be a Latinized version of the old French Elequin, which describes a brave cavalry knight who apparently fought to the death against a horde of Norman soldiers and whose ghost haunts the coast of northern France, chasing people down with his sort of demonic cavalry horse riders. So the word Elequin appears to be a corruption of the Norse word Elking, and that was a mischievous elf-like spirit who haunted the Germanic countryside and lured children in and then ate them. And he is said to be a corruption of King Hurler, which in Old English is Hurlekinig, who was the leader of the Wild Hunt. That was a collection of the most fearsome and devilish people and spirits hunting mythical creatures across the countryside. You've got one character there whose name and whose character has evolved over 7 different languages over about 1,500 years. Characters are really, really important, and the names of characters are really, really important. Harlequin himself has become, even now, I mean, he's this kind of, nimble, funny comic foil, but, he feeds into even characters today. So the Joker or even Harley Quinn, whose name is taken from him, people like that are these sort of anti-hero baddies you love to love. So it says exercise here, but I'm just going to go through these. So does anyone know the play Spring Awakening? They turned it into a musical a few years ago, and the Almeida in London just finished doing it. It's a famous German play from the late 19th century. And there's a set in a school, and the teachers in that school have ridiculous names. So let's have a look at some of their names. So you've got Sonnenstich, which literally means sunstroke, and he is loud, commanding, and arrogant. You've got a hypochondriac, jittery, nervous character who is called Fliegentod, which means flying death. You've got Knockenbrook, Bokenbone, who is violent, sullen, and overbearing. You've got Affenschmalz, who is unctuous, smug, sycophantic. His name translates to monkey grease. Knuppeldick is thick and fast. Zungenschlag is tongue thump, contrarian, complainer, stutters. And Haberbalt is the sort of school caretaker, and it literally means have it soon. And he just gets bossed about by the headmaster, and all he says is Befehl, Herr Rektor, which means at your service, my sir, basically. So what you've got here are characters whose names are completely untranslatable, because if you've ever seen Spring Awakening in an English version, they just keep the German names because the other ones just don't work. It just doesn't translate. So while you're here, does anyone have any ideas as to what you might call a character called any of these names? Zungenschlag, what might you call someone called Tongue Thump in English? If you were to do this play, would you translate the names directly, or would you come up with a different name for that character? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that? Because personally, all these English translations, Sunstroke, Flying Death, Broken Bone, etc., they don't work for me. Which is another difficulty you run into when you're translating. Generally, let's say Russian plays, so Chekhov. Generally, Chekhov plays have characters whose names you forget instantly because they're never translated from the Russian. Apart from in the Almeida 2016 version, Robert Icke, he did actually change the name. So Uncle Vanya, for instance, Vanya is a corruption of a longer name, which means John. And Vanya is like a nickname and means Johnny. So that character in Robert Icke's version a few years ago was called Uncle Johnny, not Uncle Vanya. Similarly, there's a character, I think it's Telegin. Telegin's name in that play, it comes from the word meaning cartwheel, as in the wheel of a cart. So in Robert Icke's version, he wasn't called Telegin, he was called Cartwright. So you can translate names if necessary. I would argue that these names here are so ridiculous that you could probably keep them in German or give them completely different names. I wouldn't call him Mr. Sunstroke personally, but you might. I don't know. What do you think?
I think, Danny, that the thing is, if we translated them or interpreted them into English, they'd be on the nose, like kind of names, and we avoid that, don't we?
We do avoid that. That's the thing. Whereas this is a sort of satire, this play, and the characters are really big and really daft, so they do work. But that's another thing is the sort of cultural difference from a stage play in London as it would be to a stage play in Berlin in the 1900s. That doesn't translate. These big, silly characters who act exactly like their names say. So that's just something to bear in mind. What do you change the names of the characters? What do the names of the characters mean? That is really important stuff to remember. Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to be Mr. Luddite again. There we go. Okay. All right, so talking about how to translate characters, I'm going to share screen again. That's very silly of me to do that. We're going to look at idioms now. My job is to translate the quaint, archaic tongue you people persist in speaking into the King Gug English. Anyone know what that's from?
Translations by Brian.
It's from Translations by Brian Friel. Yes, well done. So idioms are really difficult. One of the most challenging things for a translator is running into phrases, proverbs, things like that are very particular to the source language, and then to find a suitable idiom in the second language to sort of decipher what's being taken literally and what is being intended as a metaphor is a really difficult thing to do. We already touched on one a moment ago. Otherwise, as you say, you might end up with horns on your head like Moses, which he didn't have, I think. So if you think about some popular British idioms like beyond the pale, through the grapevine, have your cake and eat it, get somebody's goat, they're very particular to Britain, and taken out of context, taken literally, it makes no sense at all. But the cultural implications of the idioms are so ingrained in the sort of national consciousness that no explanation is needed for a native speaker. They're just, they're just there. They exist separately but parallel to the academic version of the language. And the same goes for other languages. So let's just have a look at a couple of examples. So, être dans la lune, to be in the moon. This is a section of the lesson that I like to call the hen's tits. By the way, it will all become obvious. So, to be in the moon means daydreaming. But again, if you were to do that literally, to be in the moon, doesn't make sense. So it was dash step de bear. The bear dance is there, meaning it's a great party. Hey, Charlie, come to this house. The bear dance is there. What? Similarly, in bocca al lupo, that's actually sort of become a bit more commonplace in English now. It means in the mouth of the wolf in Italian. It means good luck. The hen sees the snake's feet, and the snake sees the hen's tits. So this is a Thai proverb, which literally means that to see the snake and the hen, but it means to know where the bodies are buried. Is to know somebody's secrets, which in itself, to know where the bodies are buried, is a very strange idiom to use. You know, I know Ginny's secrets. I know where the bodies are buried. That makes sense. Like I say, there is also a few commonplace foreign idioms that are in English. So Schadenfreude, Zeitgeist, Joie de vivre, l'esprit d'escalier, things like that. You are going to take part in a little quiz now. On the next page of this slideshow, there are going to be several idioms translated from one language into English. I'd like you to tell me what the common English version of that idiom is. Make sense? So get your pens and papers ready. I'm going to turn the page, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to have a look through all of these whenever you're ready. All right, so let's have a look at some of these. Le Démon de Midi, you might have seen it pop up then because like I say, I'm terrible at technology. What do we think the midday demon might mean?
I thought it was a hangover.
Oh, that's a great shout. Midday demon hangover, yeah. Okay, any other takers? No, I'll tell you, it's a midlife crisis. The midday demon in France means midlife crisis. All right, reheated cabbage, cavoli riscaldati in Italian. Any takers there?
I thought bullshit.
Oh, okay, interesting. It's a really unromantic image, isn't it? Reheated cabbage, where actually the English version of it, strangely, is slightly more romantic. I'll tell you, it's to rekindle an old flame. Reheated cabbage. Icelandic, Eg tok han I bakariath. I took him to the bakery. This is a tough one, this. If you got this, I'll be very impressed.
Is it to pull the wool over one's eyes, somebody's eyes?
It's not. It's a great shout, actually. It's not. It's I beat the crap out of him, or I told him off. You know, like when you say about your kids, if your kids are playing up, I am going to give them a bollock. I am going to. It's that kind of. It's that similar kind of similar vein. I obviously won't try speaking the Korean, but the dog covered in shit scolds the dog covered in grain. Anyone have a go at that?
Is it pot calling the kettle black?
Oh, who said that? 10 points to you. People in glass houses should not throw stones. Pot calling the kettle black. Very, very good indeed. Charlie, you're not allowed to answer this one. Teufelskäse.
I don't actually know it.
Oh, what would you have a guess at?
I put Hobson's Choice, but just because it's a kind of it's vicious cycle, right?
Vicious cycle, vicious circle. Yeah.
It's obvious name, say it.
And then Je to pro mnie szpanielska vesnice. It's like a Spanish village to me.
It's all Greek to me.
It is all Greek to me. 10 points, Charlie. Well done. Fantastic work. So, as you can see, idioms throw up, often hilarious difficulties of their own. But what we're doing now is moving on to the finished product, adapting and managing tone. Okay, so you've done the literal. Here we go. Here's a quote. A play should be written in which people arrive, go away, have dinner, talk about the weather and play cards. Life must be exactly as it is and people as they are. Anyone know who said that? Any takers? Well, you meant to say translation by Brian Friel, but it's not. It's by Anton Chekhov. All right, so we've done the literal. We've got a title. We understand the characters. We've polished any idiomatic difficulties we might have. And now it's time to get a first draft together. Okay? Who is this play for? Who is your intended audience is a huge question you need to ask yourself when you're translating. How faithful do you want to be to the syntax and the rhythm of the source text is another big question you need to ask yourself. That question is the thing that divides translators and adapters the most. Personally, I tend to like it when texts aren't that reverent to the source text, particularly the older ones. I think that you should be updating and adapting tone and playing to a particular audience. Now, I know that many translators will completely disagree with that, and that is absolutely fine. There is this school of thought called foreignization at the moment, foreignization versus domestication, which is when you sort of culturally remove all references to another culture and make it and mold it to make it a British thing. It's quite a big deal at the moment, and I think it's actually probably a session of its own, and I'm probably vastly underqualified to talk about it being native English and a white man, but it's very, very, it is a big deal. I would urge you to look at it. There's quite a lot of very interesting documents being written about it. Foreignization versus domestication, it's called. I'd love to go into it, but we just don't have time. Like I say, I like it when the dialogue is sort of true to the meaning and the emotional art being experienced by the characters, rather than displaying academic brilliance in its adaptation. And that might be the actor in me talking. I like to see characters, and I like to see emotion, and I like to see story. I'm not especially interested in linguistic flair, but other people might be. Did anyone manage to see Peer Gynt at the Royal Exchange about 20 years ago? Had David Threlfall in it. That opened my eyes to a brilliant way of adapting. It was so poetic and so rhythmically brilliant, but it still sounded like you and I could talk to each other in the pub. Similarly, Young Vic's Three Sisters they did a few years ago they were great. Some adaptations even go further and make it a brand new play. So if you saw One Man, Two Governors at all, I'm sure you're aware of it. That's made the National Theatre millions and millions of pounds. It's an adaptation of an old Goldoni play from about 250 years ago, and they've made it a brand new play, even though it's meant to be influenced by commedia. It's very farcical, but they've turned it into a sort of carry-on film, which is in itself a kind of farce, but they managed to do it brilliantly. Don Juan in Soho is another example. So what we're going to do here as our last thing, we're going to look at two different versions of the same opening scene. Okay, we're going to look at The Suicide by Erdmann. It's a Russian writer from the late 20s. Some of you might know it. It's quite well known. It was banned. Erdmann was thrown in jail and exiled in Siberia and all that stuff. The first one we're going to look at is a sort of quite a dry, it's good, but it's quite a dry, very straight down the line academic version. And the other version we're going to look at is the same scene, but set in South London in 2015. Okay. What I might do here is ask, are there two people who might want to volunteer at being actors for us? Who'd like to do some reading? When I shouldn't have said actors. I don't expect you to act. Just read it. Thank you, Charlie. Anyone else? Tell you what, Charlie, I'll read with you.
Danny, sorry, I'm not volunteering, but was there a slide that you moved on to after the adapting and managing tone?
No, I'm just about to move on to it now.
Oh, okay. I thought my screen froze. Okay, thanks.
Oh, bless you. No, I just kept it on there. This is the one. Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so Charlie, why don't you be Semi-on and I'll be Masha? We don't need to worry about stage directions. Just read it and then we'll move on to the next one.
Masha, are you sleeping? Masha.
What?
Shh, it's just me. Sorry.
Semi-on.
Masha, can I ask you, are you sleeping, Masha?
What?
Did we eat all the sausage? That bologna sausage?
Did you look?
It's cold. I thought you'd remember.
You wake me in the middle of the night for bologna sausage.
I'm hungry.
Go to sleep. You've killed something in me with that sausage, Semi-on. Every day I get up in the freezing dark and walk to the factory, 12 hours of mind-numbing, back-breaking work, and after I get home and eat and fall into bed exhausted, what do? Semi-on. Are you sleeping? Semi-on.
What?
I said, let me sleep.
But
no, you've got to wake me for bologna sausage.
Oh, is there any left?
Yes, because you didn't eat it at supper.
I wasn't hungry at supper.
That's why you're hungry now.
I couldn't eat.
Mother and I go out of our way to put food on the table, my darling. Your favourite food.
Exactly. That's the reason I can't eat.
We put more food on your plate than on our own.
You torment me.
What?
How can I eat with the two of you watching me like I'm some sort of parasite, starving you mouthful by mouthful? I've no job and no money, as your mother helpfully reminds me 20 times a day, so I don't buy the food. Every meal is torment. I try not to eat, but then in the middle of the night when I'm alone in bed with you, dreaming and drooling about sausage, you crucify me with guilt.
Oh, climb down from the cross. One order of bologna coming right up. Which would you prefer, white bread or brown?
Makes no difference because...
Or cake? Bologna on cake?
I'm not going to eat it.
Oh, you're going to eat it, my friend.
Can't you see what you're doing?
Maggot. Dinner is served, my lord, maggot.
Not hungry.
You'll eat this if I have to stuff it down your throat.
Let go, woman. You're going to...
Eat your face off, you lazy.
Ah! You think you can boss me around because you wear the pants in this house. All right, this hallway, and it's killing me.
You're just hungry.
I'm falling apart, Masha.
You're falling apart. You're falling apart.
I thought you'd care.
I can't go on.
What do you mean?
This is no way to live.
You mean you want rid of me?
Lord spare me.
If you had 3 wishes, the first would be Semi-on dies.
Maybe, right at this moment. Okay, thank you. Brilliantly read, Charlie. Thank you. We're going to have a look at exactly the same scene, but from a version that the National did about 5 years ago. Okay? We can do the same. Oh, there we go. So if you be Sam, Charlie, and I'll be Maya.
Okay. Babe, Maya, you awake? You awake, babe? Maya.
What?
Did you get me a pepperami?
What the fuck?
Did you get me a pepperami?
Are you serious?
Didn't you get my text this afternoon? Can you pick me up a pepperami?
I forgot.
Great.
You did send me quite a lot of text today, Sam.
Don't worry about it.
Can I go back to sleep now?
Don't let me keep you.
Thank you.
You didn't go Greg's, nothing like that.
No, I did not go Greg's.
Don't shout.
I'm not shouting.
Knew you was angry.
Not angry.
Giving it all that. Don't worry shit, like you wasn't even bothered.
Trying to sleep.
You're bothered.
Why don't you eat that cottage pie Mum offered?
I have to be up in 4 hours.
Oh, sorry. Why? My screen's cut off. Why don't you eat the cottage pie Mum offered?
I can't see the bottom of the page. Oh, there. Sorry. Yeah. ain't taking her food.
She was only going to throw it out.
So she said, I checked the cell boy. Another week to go.
So
she lied to make me feel better. It's demeaning taking food off an old lady.
She's 47.
eating a charity cottage pie. Am I meant to feel?
Grateful?
Wounded. That's how I feel. Wounded. Couldn't have eaten that. No way.
Your choice.
You always used to get me a little something on the way home.
To give all my cash to mum, didn't I? Now you've lost your benefits. 50 quid for bills and food.
There it is. Boom. I knew it. Knew you were pissed off. All comes out now, doesn't it?
You know what? Yeah, I'm pissed off. More than pissed off. I'm fucking furious. You were angry. Angry is right here. Angry wants to strangle you right now because you couldn't get it together to sign on.
Oh, because I missed my bus.
One thing. You had to do one thing.
Never mind about my neighbourly duty. Fuck this shit.
Can't live like this.
You can't live like this.
Where are you going? Sam. Oh, round of applause for Charlie Gobbett there, everybody. Well done, mate. All right, so really simply, tell me the differences you saw between the two versions there.
First thing I noticed was the names, the anglicized.
Yes, they were. So Semyon became Sam, Masha became Maya.
The sentences in the modern version were much shorter and more kind of staccato. You know, the rhythm was more staccato.
Much more staccato. Yeah, you saw the backslashes, which indicated interruptions. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ginny. Take care. Yeah, we will be. Sorry, I know we've gone over. We will be wrapping up in a minute, guys. I just any other differences between the two? What about cultural differences?
We had like brand names in there, like Pepperami and Greg's.
Pepperami, Greg's, yeah. I'm sure that Greg's wouldn't translate if you were doing this in a theatre in, I don't know, anywhere else other than anywhere in the UK. Yeah, talking about texts, you know, it's been modernised. That I would say, would you say that one of the texts sort of ran a little smoother than the other one as well? Or would you say they both ran quite smooth?
I think because we are your audience and we're based in the UK, the second one would have fell on our ears in a more natural way, isn't it?
I'm so glad you said that phrase. Yeah, fell on our ears. Exactly. Yeah, it's about how it lands to the audience. So this has been adapted for a British audience, for a theatre in London, whereas the first one was a much more generic sort of way of looking at it. And that is the key. It's who is your audience? Who are you talking to? If you were to present this play to a group of GCSE students who've gone out to the theatre, they are absolutely going to get on board with the second version much more than they are with the first version. If you're going to present this to on a Saturday matinee at Glyndebourne, or you know, somewhere a middle class Sussex suburb, they're probably not going to go for the South London Greg's and Pepperami version. So you need to know your audience, is what I'm saying here. And you are, again, what I'm saying is you are allowed as much freedom as you want. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise, because you are. There will be other translators. Yes, Greg's version in Glyndebourne, absolutely. Get it down there. It needs to be there. Look, I was going to do one last exercise, but I am really aware of time and I don't want to keep you. But what I will say is, if you do want to do an exercise, get a block of text from a dry adaptation of something. So have a look at old adaptations of Chekhov or even Brecht, Schiller, things like that, and make it your own. Give it your own voice, as you've seen here. By the way, I am not in any way saying that one version of the play we've just read is better than the other. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they are both for a specific audience. And that is the key thing I want you to take away from this, is that whatever it is you translate, give it your voice, make it land for the audience you're giving it to, while also, quite hard to juggle, but while also keeping that cultural and the flavour of the source text intact. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. If anyone's got any questions at all, then please just unmute yourself and let me know. But otherwise, thank you all. So I'm really touched that you all came to join in on this. I hope you found it informative. Yes, Naomi, hand up.
I just had a question.
Yeah.
It's basically, is there any sort of things to look out for or common mistakes to try to avoid as someone who's going to work probably a lot with texts and doesn't speak the source language? So stuff I need to be aware of.
So you mean when you're doing the adaptation?
Yeah, as in with this space, people already approaching me asking me to do sort of translations or adaptations of East Asian Chinese plays and such.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I don't speak Mandarin, so.
But would you argue that you're possibly more in touch with the cultural side of those plays, even if you don't know the language? You might be more in touch with the culture. Not at all.
Not overly.
Okay.
Well, depending on what it is, because it's like, well, obviously, like, I don't know, 18th century China is quite different from like now, so.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So the question being, can you repeat the question just so I can get a handle on it?
I think my question was more about language, though, to be fair, than culture. It was just about, is there anything to look out for or common mistakes when you're working with an adapted text, but you don't speak the source language yourself?
That's such a good question. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a Chekhov watcher. I've adapted. I don't speak Russian, but I've adapted a Chekhov play before, and I think my philosophy was my downfall on that one. My philosophy being, you should make it for your voice. You should make it for your intended audience. You should make it sound like it can come out of your voice, of your mouth. I actually think with the Chekhov there, I didn't give the text enough reverence, and it actually took away some of the emotional weight of the piece, because in the Russian, you know, they swing from big, ridiculous, tearful speeches to raucous laughter in the space of 2 sentences. I didn't give that the weight it needed, so that is a cultural thing. So I think it's about being aware of what was intended by the writer at that time.
So yeah, having that cultural awareness.
Yeah, exactly.
Language.
So it is more cultural than linguistic. That the main difficulty for me, especially if it's a language that I don't really know.
Cool, thank you.
Can I just quickly ask something about? I mean, the way you talked about your working method, it strikes me that in the way you work, that the relationship between the adapter and the translator is obviously key to that, and also there has to be that mutual trust between you. And going back to your point, Naomi, about a language you don't understand, I suppose the adapter has to really trust the translator to provide that information, to help with that process. Is that what you found, Danny, in your work with?
Definitely, especially early days. So like I say, early days, we did it very, very, I was the translator and Mark was the adapter. And then after that first draft appeared, we were both the adapter and both the translator. But yeah, if you are working with someone else, you do need to be on exactly the same wavelength. And all these guys that I mentioned, Christopher Hampton, Mike Poulton, David Eldridge, they will all have paid someone specific to be their literal translator, because they trust them, and they know that they're going to get some good work out of them.
So they get to choose their translator then, if you're like the big name writer.
Thanks, Rachel. I'd assume so. Yeah, I'd assume that they get to pick who it is that gets to do it. 9 times out of 10, especially if it is one of those people we were talking about, Patrick Marber or someone, then yeah, they would have chosen someone to work with.
How do you make it work when you're assigned, when you don't have that power, when the theatre's like, well, we've got whoever it is?
Well, strangely, the thing is, when you're doing the literal, the literal translation that I produce is likely to be very similar to the literal translation that another translator would produce, because you are just doing it word for word. So in those terms, I think it's just about how the ball's landed in your court. Yeah, a DM. Yeah.
Thank you for a great session. That was really informative.
Thank you for coming.
Well, first thing is, if we can get a copy of that slide, that would be really helpful, because it was really helpful to see the breakdown of the types of translations. But if you've got, I'm going to use my scenario. Actually, why am I doing it? Okay, so I normally write in English, but I think, because I'm bilingual, I think in both Tigrinya, which is one of the Eritrean languages, and in English. So sometimes I can't find the word in English, so I'll throw in a placeholder in a different language, not necessarily just my own. But I want to consciously work on a piece of work where I write it in English, have it translated, because I'm not completely academically fluent in Tigrinya. I'm a first-generation immigrant here in this country, but English is really my first language. So I want to translate my own piece of work into Tigrinya, into proper, like what you said, literal translation, and then adapt it from there. So when it's something like that, where it's gone through these stages, is it like an inspired by or based on? What kind of scenario is that? If you were thinking of it as there was another person involved, not just myself.
Wow, it's a great question. It's what you think does it the most justice. I think it's about if you think the version that you've translated is a fair reflection of the original, then absolutely you can put translated by or adapted by, in a new version by. I tend to steer clear of the in a new version by. I'm not a big fan of that, because it sort of excuses the changes you've made. I think embrace the changes you've made, and embrace the fact that it's a different language, and there'll be different idioms and different tonality to the language. I think embrace that and don't apologize for it. And I find in a new version by to be an apology in some respect.
Yeah. So if I was thinking about it in like terms of phrase, so people in the diaspora, we have very different kinds of ways of saying the Eritrean or like Tigrinya terms and things like that. So that's really reflective, as you said, of the character of their. So this is what I'm thinking. Is it co-writing it? If you're writing with somebody who knows the same language as yourself, it's just a weird situation I find myself in, where I'm like, I'm going to work with a professional translator and an interpreter, but am I co-writing it, or am I the writer with a translator? So it's that kind of defining the board.
It is tough, that, because the word translator, like I say, there's several different layers to it, several different levels and several different meanings to the word translator. So let's take a monolingual playwright. I don't know the guy. I don't know if he's monolingual, but let's take, for instance, Patrick Marber, and let's say, as an example, Patrick Marber can only speak English. He can still use the translated by Patrick Marber, whereas I would argue that it's adapted by him and translated by whoever it was that did the translation. So I tend to only really like using the translation, translated by, for the person that knows the source language and the language it's been written into.
Okay.
So I sometimes do I translate subtitles for in-house training videos, like how fire safety videos and things like that. They would be in English, the videos, but I would translate them into German and put German subtitles on them, because it's in English. Because I'm not native German, I can speak it and I can write it and all that stuff, but because I'm not native, I needed to run my subtitles by an actual native German speaker to make sure that they were right and they were polished and they sounded like a German person would speak. So I tried to make sure that person got credit, so they got a translation credit translated by me and that person.
That makes sense, because I think that's the scenario I was thinking about, of you're sense checking. So the tone, I can get that, because I'm a fluent speaker. But when it comes to the actual written form, making sure that it translates, it's interpreted in the right way once it's performed. Anyway, thank you. It's very complicated. So
it is really complex. And like I say, what we did today is only just scratched the surface. And actually, I had to miss out a little chunk as well, just because you were all so brilliant and we're running out of time. But this is literally scratched the surface. And honestly, there are reams and reams of papers, dissertations, theses, everything written on translation and translation studies, and they're really interesting. And if you get chance, just sign up to a website. They send you PDFs every week and have a read of it. And I would especially recommend just looking up foreignization versus domestication when it comes to translation studies, because that's a really interesting thing that's reared its head over the last few years.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, if that's it, guys, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you could take at least something away from this, even if it's that you can use the word pepperami in an adaptation of something. But thanks very much, and I hope to see you all down the road, and best of luck with everything that you're doing.
Great, thank you so much, Danny. That was a brilliant session, really informative.